Hello, everyone. This is going to be our first feedback stream for students or anybody looking for assistance. The artist that submitted, the first artist to submit, and I didn't realize until 3 days later because I checked the Dropbox and there was no, I didn't get any uh, notifications, but Shreyak Duggirala submitted this really cool character design with lots of little supplementary images and references. So you gave us quite a bit to work with, which is awesome for our very first stream. Thank you so much, Shreyaka. Hey, Aiden and Nark, Narky, if that is your real name. So this is again, this is all off the cuff. Very little preparation went into this, and actually, I had like a Kevin McAllister moment where I was like, earlier today when I sat down about an hour ago, I realized I haven't installed Wacom or my Nostromo pad onto this computer, so I had to get all that stuff oriented before I actually got the stream up and running. Alex Chen, my Alex. Again, I'm gonna treat it like class. So a lot of it will be off the cuff, and it will be treated as if this was assignment for class. So we'll be giving feedback in that context, and also based off of the character brief, um, based on who the character is and your intentions with the design itself. I'm still getting oriented to the very bizarre nature of me talking to a screen rather than a screen of classmates. So right off the bat, the thing that stands out is there's obvious accomplished presentation in level of detail. So like kind of like ready to work in terms of the presentation and the competency. So the thing that we're gonna focus on is iconography and the presentation of the design and the character illustration and how that impacts the viewer. So like how do we make those things sort of stick with the client or viewer at a glance? And we'll talk a little bit about how you take that iconography, which ideally the iconography is going to be indicative of how it works within the the story itself. With comic book characters are a good sort of litmus test for like or a good example for how that graphic design marries to narrative, either in a shallow sense or a more deep sense, depending on the character. Obviously, Batman being a bat, a little on the nose, but we still want to get there with what we're doing. And also, does that iconography say something about the character herself, the character's allegiance or family, meaning like a family crest or an institution that the character is sort of involved with. So like how do those abstract designs tell that sort of story, or is the abstract design simply uh, or fully utilitarian, meaning that that graphic comes out of the function of the suit and how it was built and how it's meant to perform its duty or its function. So it's a lot of different little components that we want to start balancing out. And like and it's nice to have a tool chest of these keywords and these building blocks so that we know what we're working with. So because all of this can be very daunting, right? It's like this highly realistic, um, detailed character from head to toe. So it's a lot to sort of like there's a lot of peripheral elements that like if it could be daunting to sort of parse each one of them out um, if we don't have the vocabulary for it. So we just want to start like being thoughtful and mindful of that thing and making lists, whether it's mental or actually physically writing those words down, that so we can grab hold of these different sort of elusive elements and building blocks of a design so that we can balance it properly with its level of importance and in hierarchy in relationship to everything else. It's a lot of blabbing. These are all super cool. I'll say, like, when I get to this, I find this to be more striking. Um, Something about the flat. There's like there's a looseness to the line, obviously, but then the flat and graphic nature um, isn't sort of muddied by anything else. And when I get into the final stuff, there's this again. I'll try to call out every component that we're going to talk to as we get through all this stuff. But when my first impression of this is the yellow. And then if that is the case, and if we're being objective or clinical about how we're assessing it, is that a good or a bad thing? And if it and is that yellow taking us away from the focal point or letting us flow towards where we should be going? And again, depending like how much we orchestrate this stuff thoughtfully and we sort of like artistically sort of like guide, um, hopefully in like in a way that's not so heavy-handed, will depend on the function of the narrative of the element within the story. So that is to say, like, if it's a superhero, then a lot of that iconography is usually up towards the chest. So like you go right there. So if that's the case with her, like what is this yellow stuff? What is the blue and what is the black? Right now there's a proportion, right? The blue and the black sort of marry together, but the blue is clearly separate. But that's the dominant proportion. And then we have yellow, which is the sort of subdominant. But because of the value contrast and the chroma or the hue contrast, our eyes go right to those areas. And if you could tell that if you just made the boots themselves blue and black, then we would go straight up here. There would be nothing distracting about what's going on here. And we also want to think about how the character is going to perform and turn in space. So like we don't have to do everything on one view because we could have some of that yellow. Like let's say we have a vertical yellow going right here, and that could lend to as she's moving and running, because this is a speedster character for anybody who hasn't read the character design brief on the Discord. That linear line of high strong value contrast would help with accent the animation of her movement in the scene. But right now, like as a static thing, the boots are sort of distracting from the upper third of the character, for better or for worse. And intent is going to tell us what if that is good or bad. Intent and function, obviously. And like just another, for sake of argument, let's say you did want the boots to stand out. Well, then maybe it's a character who just got a new ability, and the boots are like maybe she has street clothes on, and then you got those special boots on, and then that becomes the point and statement of the character. But as of now, we've got the gauntlet area, the forearm area, aside from the bangles themselves, the boots, and then the areas on the top of the bicep and her chest, which is calling attention. And they're all sort of these little islands off into their own. So we want to sort of find a simpler graphic design that we could add and flesh all these loving like details into and weave between. Sorry, just reading the chat real quick. I love this the silhouette for the boot. It's very distinct and fun. And as we get into talking about the details, we can see how we can emphasize that bold graphic design. So if we how do we zoom on this? I can't zoom. Oh, there you go. So how do you keep that that great graphic from a far shot, and retain some of that funness? And it all comes out to like, well, how do we feel about the shapes? And there's a lot of things that are juxtaposed with one another that aren't creating a flow. that's as elegant as the broader statement. When I say broader, I mean like from the bottom of the sole to the top of the boot itself. Um, Gain that same sort of fun um, within some of these other functional details, and also like create form languages that feel like there's not too many different types of statements, meaning like whether there's like bands or clasp or buckles and things that are holding it together. How do we fuse the engineering and like create an interesting statement that adds to the visual interest and layering depth as we build the iconography through the simple graphic design. And I know this is a big jumble of words right now, so maybe when we get into the drawovers, it'll make a little, a little more sense. Um, and I always find that like a great litmus test is, especially when you're doing props, is like, is it so interesting? And it doesn't, and meaning like so interesting as in, is it compelling enough? And that doesn't necessarily mean detailed enough, because obviously the basic shapes here are fairly simple, which is great. But compelling enough to where like somebody wants to own that prop. Um, it's like if you see it at a Comic Con, somebody selling it, like is it interesting in that way to you? Where it's not going out of its lane in terms of the narrative and the story and becoming something different, um, but compelling in its own right while retaining its simplicity. And when I look at this, I see some really cool stuff, and I think the most successful ones end up being the ones where there's some movement and a simpler statement in terms of a value in color palette, limited value in color palette, and that's a really great keyword to like stick in the back of your mind is limited palette or limited value or limited color palette. Um, because it's a great springboard, because like if things are getting too heavy or too becoming too much, you're saying too many things and you're losing sight of a strong base. uh, I feel like that's always the great jumping off point. And I feel like this number 6, number 7, number 1 are great versions of that. And that's not to say we should never get detailed like we have here, 2, 3, and 5. Um, but when it's not creating a strong read at a glance or across the room, and all the feedback here is clearly for a certain type of art. It's for the art that we love. It's for video games. It's for film, for animation. So we are talking about a very specific thing here. And to me, that means there are clear right and wrong answers to what we're doing. So as long as we know who the character is, we know what the function is, we know the level of engineering from anywhere from earthly levels of engineering all the way to like alien levels of engineering. We want to know where we land on that bar, like, or going back into like medieval times, like what are our parameters, and those parameters and where that character lies tells us the truth of what is right and what is wrong. It's not opinion. The story will tell us if it's right or correct. Usually when I gather reference, I'm like doing a little bit, I'll always go right to the page and sketching, or and I always have this vast library of references already cataloged that I've cataloged over the years while working. And that, I feel like that habit has really helped me alone, because I'll always be able to remember something that I saved. And I don't know if it's just the act of saving it, and maybe I came across it on accident as flipping through some of my folders. But that will help with my visual library. So I do think there's a very healthy aspect of education in terms of reference gathering and cataloging into specific groups and folders. Because I also have like, I have that catalog, but I also have these, like we all have folders of unsorted imagery. But even then, like I still remember those things and try to hunt those things down. Um, so a lot of what I'm working with is my foggy memory of that stuff, which has influenced my visual library. And then as I'm working, then I'll go find specific things on Google when I need something very specific that I can't find as quickly within my personal saved out library. I think my rough intent was to have the focal point be the boots and legs since she runs a lot. This is all making sense so far. What are her powers? She's a speedster. Oh, he said it. Super speed. So I've actually never worked on a speedster character aside from we did some art direction on the Spider-Man Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. That Leonardo Romero did all the he set the style and he's the lead character designer of that. But the first season had a speedster character, so that was like my closest brush with actually um, designing some of that. But that was just more like helping art direct and getting that along in line with Jack Kirby's aesthetic. Um, so I'll sort of be problem solving this as we go here because I get what you're saying. Like we want to make that important part of her of who she is, but it comes down to proportional hierarchy, and this is why there's always a way, there's always a springboard to make this to organize this stuff. So like we're not always lost. So and again, I always come back to proportional hierarchy across all visual components, and that's going to keep us in line. So when we don't know what to do, it's like, okay, she's a speedster. I want the boots to be important, but then you say how important and in what way are they important? And performance tells a lot of how they act throughout the story. So are they important all the time? Do we always want them to be a visual statement, a strong visual statement rather? And that's why I always use another keyword, animation, as just another like in my never-ending list of sort of keywords and phrases that help keep springboard me um, onto different ideas throughout my design is that word animation, which comes down to performance. Obviously, is like how the character moves, how the character acts, how the elements within the costume or the design itself move within the world, and how does she interact with them as well? Like how are you actually putting these things on, and how are you taking them off? And that's to say that perhaps we do have some yellow there, but like right now, let's say the proportion of yellow is 90%. What if we take it down to 45%? But when she starts to run, then we have that strip of yellow that maybe ignites and glows a little bit here, and then it pumps it up. So there's sort of like as she's turning and moving through space, you get a little bit of a Kira trail or something. So you're getting visual interest through performance and through it interacts with the world, and not just within the static image. 'Cause I think that's the a mistake a lot of us make earlier in our development is we're trying to do everything in this 1/3 image when we need to be thinking about how the design is living and breathing. And again, that's why the animation as a key word has been really helpful. All right, let's just jump it in. Because I was drawing on my iPad so much, I hadn't installed Photoshop onto this. I was like frantically making my macros for my Nostromo pad. Let's see if I can show you guys the. I call it Nostromo pad, but now it's the Tartarus Pro something by Razer. Um, Super awesome because it has a scroll wheel for brush size and a D-pad for color picking and zooming in and out really quickly. I can't work without it. It literally has crippled me and it made me hate break the iPad for so long because you have all of your macros and all of your key commands right at your fingertips. You don't even have to use a keyboard, so it's all just as your hand is resting without even having to look. So when it comes, if I ever don't have it when I start a new job and that it's not installed, I'm like fairly slowly looking at my keypad or my keyboard. And I just installed these Photoshop brushes, and I don't know why the pressure sensitivity is not going on. So, but I always keep my brushes fairly large, and ever since they updated, it got really slow. Photoshop 6, this would move fast as all heck, but It chugs because we all love Adobe. But right now I'm just going to use this same blocky brush I talked about during the Tay comic portion of the last stream, and then an airbrush eraser just because I need to keep it simple since I haven't really got this computer up and running yet. Let's see what this, oh shit. I don't have my macro for image size, so I gotta actually go up there. Inches. I would say get in the habit of, oh, that's cool. All right, guys, technical difficulties. For some reason, this is not remembering what I want, so I have to go back there and fiddle with that. Okay. I'd say the standard for setting up your images is it's sort of difficult now because I see kids are now using like the phone width as I think the one of the other artists who uploaded. I was like, what is this really long aspect ratio? And then I looked at it on my phone. And I was like, oh, it fits within that. But it's most things that are presented on the job are usually on a large TV or on somebody's MacBook, and that's usually 16:9 in terms of aspect ratio. So if you want your image to be as to sort of come off the frame as much as possible, like stick with that. Otherwise, it's gonna the wider the frame gets, the more it's going to be set back into the screen. So right now, like the bangles are very important. This is where like some more story would help me understand how to take this design further, because obviously the bangles are in conflict with the yellow of the gauntlets, and we have so many questions to ask. Like, where did the suit come from? Is it a standard suit? And if that's the case, then we can't change the yellow, right? I mean, we can, like, obviously the story wouldn't give us that kind of bizarre constraint, but if that was the case, then that would be problematic. So ideally, and this is where we talk about proportional hierarchy and like creating balance and creating focus and letting the focus come from strong contrast across all our proportional hierarchies. So just getting rid of the yellow, you can see where you already say, okay, well, there's the, dude, what is going on with this color picker? And then, even then, we got rid of a fairly large footprint of the yellow, and pardon, even this yellow here is still in conflict because, and I like to use this mindset of you're thinking abstractly or representationally, and to quickly address the representational, just flip your mindset to the abstract. You're just seeing shape, you're just seeing proportion, you're just seeing the color in all of the relationships. You're not looking at the literal thing, because the literal thing is going to slow you down because it's too daunting. And we need to make it accessible. We need to be able to have techniques for moving quickly through these things so that we can keep designing and not let ourselves get stopped by the process itself. So what I was going to say is, I know what's happened. It's like, I almost said the F word. The ink, Windows ink. I have not addressed that yet because this is still a somewhat new computer. Oh, good Lord. So this is what we're talking about, the abstraction, proportion. So like, even though it is different, the footprint of the yellow going up the arm here is too close in general. The square footage, visually, in terms of its visual weight, is in conflict with the other proportion. So this is a box. This is generally a box. And that's why getting rid of, good gracious. I love you, Windows Ink. So that doesn't look good, but it's doing the right thing at the moment. It's letting the bangles be important, and that's what's most important at this point. And even here, so the more I talk, the scratchier my voice gets, the more I cough. Life continues. Um, so getting back to the pure abstraction of it, even the hand, now that I'm coming down here, like as I work my way through a design, I'm thinking about every little tiny area as this microclimate of composition. So we're sort of like, it's you're sort of floundering throughout. Like you hit these macro things, you hit these more um, mid-level and smaller and granular things, but you're sort of moving in circles, trying to have them all flow well together. And that's why I'm always zooming in and out quite a bit as I'm working, because I need to get in there. I see how it's looking on the different levels of, as it'll appear in the camera. Um, but let's just say that when I get to this area, now that I've made those decisions on trying to create a stage. So we talk about like theater. This is the stage for this to play on, to be the most important, the star of the show of the arm. Now I get down here and you can see that this sort of shape, the static shape, the shape without much movement, in relationship to this, because we've already got a shape that is fairly static from the side view. Obviously it turns in space as it moves. Can we create more motion? And again, it all depends on the narrative tone of the story, the function of the suit itself, who built it within the world. Is too much design too much for for it to feel correct within the story? Again, meaning like, is it just like very utilitarian, military built suit, and it's not um, considering aesthetics so much as like pure rock solid function. But then even then, sometimes when we get into that, we still want it to feel cool and fun. But what's the level of fun? And again, tone of the story is going to tell us the level of fun of the design, or in the character itself also, how fun the character should be. And just based off of what you did here, I'm saying there is some fun in this. Like the poppy yellow and somewhat chromatic blue is giving me a sense of fun, even though it does feel like it has a very strong sense of military, uh, Metal Gear Solid quality to it. So again, now we know the building blocks. What are the proportional ratios between all those? How fun versus how military, tactical, near future, whatever. Um, that's all to say. Long-winded way of saying, can I thin out? Good grief, color picker. Can I thin out the fingers from the side view so that we go from a more boxy finger to a thinner finger in terms of how it, even within that subtle range, how we're creating motion through subtlety. Because as the hand turns, it can still feel boxy. Like say the top of the hand is all yellow, but the side of the hand, like maybe is it blue or black on the bottom, the underside of the so now you can see that your eye starts. Jesus Louise, there it goes. There's that ring. Did we all see it? Windows Ink. So we're trying to create that motion through subtlety. And again, the orchestration of that should be thoughtfully proportioned out, right? Because everything is sexy and cool. Is that too much of a statement? I always like to use Cartoon Saloon, I think the Iris Studio. They do Secret of Kells as like taking it to the extreme in terms of stylization. Like everything flows so much that it's such an incredible statement. Um, so there's a level of which is perfectly great for that. But I'm saying like in terms of costume design, there's a level of orchestration or or like you're telling the viewer that this is so designed, and is that a problem or not? Like obviously an artist had a hand in this when it should feel like a product of the world that it's coming from. Uh, okay. If anybody has any like super duper quick hacks for turning off Windows Ink that within like 30 seconds, please let me know. Look at that. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry. Um, in This is sort of uh my problem to bear. When it comes to drawing arms, I tend to add linear elements, elongated linear elements. So I'm like, oh, well, maybe I'll add a seam here, and then that seam will sort of flow into the edge of that yellow. So, and I like to use which they in some like in rendering uh, passages. So like a core shadow is a passage between light and shadow, or a lost edge is the same thing, like a passage between zones within the illustration itself. Um, so using uh, passages and transitions to create movement and flow between different areas. So there's some sort of grace, and not everything is oddly juxtaposed one with one another if we don't aren't thoughtful enough about it. And that's what we're saying. That's why I bring up Secret of Kells, is because they hit flow to the highest degree, and that could be problematic for us if we're we're playing that hand a little too much. I think this would be a good example of where a passage would help, because you're telling this becomes a point of tension because you've got this little island here of strong value contrast as it gets hit with the rim light. So it almost feels like a harder piece of material above this base layer of black. And then that becomes an important element because it's a point within a zone with padding between the two sides. So an easy way to alleviate that would be to have that strap here and then a seam here, and then you're going from one zone to another um, through a linear transition. And I still think that the yellow of the hand is still a little problematic. Or the design of the bangles need to be addressed. So I don't know the history behind these or what they're referencing. So maybe there's something there where like we can't change that simplistic nature. But I sort of want to add some linear quality to it by like moving this down and maybe this up, so that it does create a bit of a movement that's not just cutting the viewer through that box shape. I don't know if that's appropriate, but that'd be an easy shorthand or one way to do that. And that's why, so I'm using this brush now that if you make it really small, you can get some nice line work. And that's what I sketched all my thumbnails for that Tay comic book. But if you make the brush a little bit larger, it's great because you get a really nice wash that's flat and graphic, but it also builds texture while not allowing yourself to paint too much. And I did turn down my Wacom pressure sensitivities in these early stages or stages of like reassessment, because it forces my hand to be a little bit more brutal with the stroke so I don't get lost in painting. So anytime we're designing, if we ever find ourselves painting or drawing, and I know that's sort of like, what the hell are you talking about? The drawing portion can slow you down, because if you're drawing a thing, you're not designing a thing. We may have mentioned that in one of the last live stream. So whatever we can do to force our hand to continue to explore shapes and reorient shapes, the better we're going to be through the design process. We can draw it later. That's the hard part. Or you're a magical artist and you can draw perfectly as you're designing as well. But I'm going to err on the side that most of us are not that magical. color picker's gonna make me lose my mind. And even in here, and this is so when stuck, having base rules of thumb will always keep us in check. It always gives us a place to go if we're lost. We're like, I don't know how to make this better. I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. And that's where the abstraction comes in, because it's like, oh, well, the abstraction is not really working. So I can, what real world things could I utilize to make that abstraction flow a little better? Pardon. Oh, goodness gracious. Okay, so my first thought is this. This is becoming a problem. It's broken up in a lot of tiny little plane changes. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Can we say more with less? And also, is the proportion doing the thing it should be doing? And what should it be doing, right? We want to add some dynamics to it. And right now, a lot of these shapes are these sort of mid-sized shapes that are fairly static. So if we, sorry, I just coughed into the microphone. If we want to add a dynamic quality to a static object, we got to taper it. I like using caricature, so like another keyword, because I like redundancy in my terminology. So caricature, just it's another way of saying push it further. But for me, like caricature means like you're really pushing it. It's like, and sometimes I have to caricature my perspective on my costumes and really make it feel like it's wrapping around the form and getting the structure correctly. Just in my mind, that's what I need. But right now, I'd say like a lot of these shapes are fairly static. So I want to push the dynamics I want to push the tapering of the graphic design to create more movement, so that even as a static form, the character standing in the T pose, you feel the dynamics of the character and who the character is. Control T. So, and right now we're battling two things. The level of square footage of the yellow is adding to the funness of the character. So the more we lessen it, the more sort of it changes the tone, the tonal narrative of the character. Excuse me. So that's two elements I'm trying to balance as I'm dealing with. I need the character to feel fast as a static character, but I also need to retain the tonal narrative of either the film or the character and the characters itself. And I like to think of like if never doing too much of a one note costume, especially for these things that have a lot of high fidelity. So like how are you building it from the inside out? So what's your base layer? What's your underwear? What's your pants and t-shirt? What's your your button-up shirt? What's your jacket? And with this, same thing. What's the base suit? For this, I would say like in obviously the yellow, blue, and black, it feels like that's sort of all on the same level, but for sake of argument, let's just make the black the base suit, and then the yellow and blue are sort of on top of that. It could be overcomplicating it to make the yellow and blue separate things as well. So maybe they're all like they're sort of saying the same thing with just different color paneling. Or the blue is here. It looks like it's a little bit more protective, so that would be slightly raised above it in terms of our ordering system. So black, yellow, Jesus, blue. And then on our bar graph, again, there's different functions and different levels of physical proportion. But as we're dealing with the sort of graphic design we want to start thinking that layering as a way to weave the functionality, the architecture, and the engineering of the suit into those graphic designs. So the graphic designs are a result of the architecture of the costume itself, rather than, again, a cool character with that's just one note and everything's just a sticker on that one note flat statement. That's what I was thinking. 3 layers. Black is the base, yellow, thinner protective layer, blue is thicker protective layer. Okay, if that's the case, we really want to hit it home further because I think it's not feeling that way from head to toe at least. And right now, when I reassess my own designs, what I'm doing is working with flat shape and line work. So drawing with shape and then drawing small shadows and seams with line, but never drawing outlines of the larger blocking of values. And then any sort of texture that I might build up from the brush is just a happy accident, just like building a little bit of textural richness as I go, but I'm never letting that stop me. Excuse me. Yeah, maybe if I'm pushing this black up here, maybe I can put the underbelly of the arm a little more yellow. Dear Windows Ink, stop it. Oh, I see you have a little bit of that blue there. It is helpful to think about how the character is sort of positioned in different frames. It's like if we do have because as I'm getting in here and as I'm thinking about how I want to reorient some of these graphic designs, I want to think about how we have a shot. Oh, oops. Control D. Her running. Then we've got the yellow. Good gracious. And then what's happening on the chest? Like, how do we create, if she's coming towards the camera, how do we create a counter jeez, element that's going to accent the motion of the character? So like some sort of statement, like V statement, that's going to flow and cut through the frame. And that's where using like the sort of disparate elements and try to create a greater statement from one zone to the next. And we'll utilize rhythm lines like what you could see in the Riley method or in the Andrew Loomis illustration book diagrams. So like I want to utilize this flow here and have that cut into something that's going to create a V here. So the viewer is sort of connecting the dots between the two zones here and here. So this is not important at all. It's not really, you've got glowy bits, you've got a clasp, but the clasp doesn't necessarily feel functional. It feels more theatrical, like an inference of function. So it's not doing much for heavy lifting for us right now. And we have to play up the graphic design as it performs so I can step back from some of that detail and get back into the larger statements. And rhythm as it moves through space or form and volumes, like we want to think about the graphic design and how it feels as it's moving out of space. Because right now, like this, the bowing nature of this sort of convex statement here, and then it's also convex here. It's not helping push that dynamic quality of a speedster. So if we grab that dynamic rhythm line, let the rhythm line tell the story of the character through pure abstraction, then we probably want something that has a little bit more of a simple flow without any odd, because any extra, any lack of flow is going to create a juxtaposition that's going to stop the viewer's eye. So the fact that this bows in, then I would have this bow out, and you can see how they're not connected to one another necessarily. And I think there could be an S curve going through space as the character turns. So you could have a flow like this, but as you see it from this angle, it all flows together nicely. So it's the form is changing in space. But even this is sort of telling me, like, I really like the boldness of that. She's tipping down, like this would be the top of her shoulders here, and you see that yellow on the chest. Like, should I play up the yellow more on her biceps? Because otherwise we're not going to get that really cool statement as she's powering through like towards the camera, unless we broaden up that bicep a bit. So that's accomplishing two things, right? Like I was struggling like balancing, adjusting the graphic design and retaining the fun, and then seeing the character in a different light sort of told me like how I can broaden the funness of that value to push for a graphic design as the character's turning and moving through space. And let's maybe, because I'm trying to think between the two zones. We've got our layers, we got our black, yellow, blue. What's the form language shift from one to the other? So like thinking of the engineering between them all, but also like you can get into the abstraction of it and say like I want to orient this a bit based off of aesthetic. So I'm thinking because of this statement here, maybe I want the blue, I guess blue or yellow and black maybe have more of a sort of wind tunnel relationship, like a spiral flow. So it is go look at the Andrew Loomis or Riley method rhythm lines, sort of like that, where like you're marrying anatomy into a flow of composition, um, and then you get back to the structural utilitarian nature with the other component, so the blue, which is more protective in the outer layer. So maybe that's where we will layer in some of the hard angles. Shreyak's taking Kevin's figure drawing class right now. I've learned a lot about importance of rhythm in the past couple of weeks and excited to apply to the paintings I do from now on. Awesome, man. Yeah, Kevin's the one-stop shop. He's pretty freaking great. He's talking about Kevin Chen from the Concept Design Academy, if anybody is wondering or unfamiliar. And so this is what made me think of like the sort of wind tunnel particle flow was because I didn't want to necessarily keep bringing this value down and have it compete with the bangles. So I wanted it to flow into a nice, elegant curve, and that retains the value separation that I needed, so that the dark blue black is the base for the bangles to sing. And then here, again, plane change, the more angle and plane changes you have, the more option or reasons there are for the viewer to stop the eye. So just think of them at every sharp corner as a point of visual tension and visual weight. And that's just, you're going back down. So I've got a lot from the blue to the value of the black interacting with the yellow. It's just a lot to deal with. And now that we have this idea of like the black and yellow are going to sort of marry into a more flowing element, we can just use those S curves to eliminate, for the most part, right? Let's say what's the proportion of that? So that's another component. We're another building block we're taking a mental note of, or take the physical note until you're able to have that sort of mental checklist build up. So we've got the flow of yellow versus black through S curves, and them converging into a point, and then maybe just, so that's, I don't know, 90 or 85% of that statement, but as they interact with one another, maybe there's another 15% that is, it transitions. So at a transition area, so like let's say as it gets to a strap, then the yellow maybe flows into a couple angular points. So it feels more structural. So it goes from a very elongated linear statement, which is fused through the stitching. Then it gets to the area of transition where it needs to clasp, or something needs to clasp into it, or there's like metal woven into that portion. That's where it can start to feel a little bit harsher because it's transitioning from one zone to the next. And it's not, the footprint isn't that heavy-handed statement it was. I'm glad you brought up bringing up Kevin, or taking Kevin's figure drawing class, because it really does come down to like, this is why everybody says study from life, study the fundamentals, because if you know the basics of design, if you know the basics of anatomy and the rhythm and flow of bone to muscle to fatty tissue to skin, like it's all there. Everything we need to do this stuff is in those classes. Pardon. I'm gonna call out like something that a lot of concept artists do, or maybe it's concept artists earlier in development do, is the idea of bordering things, like adding trim or adding a cut line. And that's something you need to like nip in the bud right away. It's just a hallmark of sort of, we don't know what to do, so here's some detail. And that's why I like the idea of like, if you kind of understand your graphic design, now let's make that graphic design realized through the layering of the costume and how each of those layers weave in and out into one another to create the graphic design. So that makes me want to, like, using that as a springboard, address some of these linear statements here. Because again, it's aesthetic over function. And we want to create that aesthetic through some sort of validated function in architecture and engineering. In engineering, another keyword I find really evocative and helpful for me is, if it's not engineered by someone within the world, then it's just nonsense concept art. And since we can be lucky enough to do this for a job, we should put that sort of love and care into the thought behind it. So I'm as we're going in, and I'm, because like I'm still assessing the macro statements. That it's hard to do it fully macro, because you need to get in there and understand how it's affecting the subtle, like the second, third, and fourth reads. So that's why we're zooming in and out, and like it is that sort of floundering circular um, approach of like how I'm trying to marry everything together. But as I'm zooming out, I'm trying to think, because I'm still on that idea of the spiral interaction between the black and the yellow, because we've got it here now where we've just turned this into a simple curve, as then it gets into the transition area where it gets into like more angled statements. Um, and that, and then because I was like, does this need to, I mean, to simplify this now? It was like, oh, well, we still want the blue to have the angular uh, shape design. So not necessarily. So I think what we want to do is, here, I want to curve this out. So let's say that this is black, like a black transition to maybe blue padding on the back of the tricep, perhaps. So I do want this to end in a bit of a very elegant, soft curve that then gets into our angular statements. Because from head to toe, I want to clock that as being the base. The base yellow, black, which is the base suit for the most part. Because there's a bit of weaving here, like, right, like this starts to weave above, but I want that to be the under a clear layering of the first two layers, in creating a clear contrast. So like if we have a field of design of abstraction, oops, come on. The base layer and then the top layer. And even within that one component, the clarity should read within the simplest graphic design parameters in contrast. So here, even within this abstraction, we have no clarity because it's so messy and so busy because of the proportions of how things are spaced. But the consistent field of S curves creates some sort of staging for the contrasting, the clear contrasting upper level. And that's what we need to do, is we need to think about things in different visual components and then balance them well within themselves, and then how they relate to the other things. And if we're not calling them out as their own specific element, it's hard to know how to balance them on that macro scale, and make them all marry and meld and be harmonious. Jesus. Be harmonious. Source of our powers is the bangles, right? I'm just reading the chat from, I believe, Alex. I can't move as fast as I'd like to because this window ink is slowing down every time I need the color pick. You can see here, so this was that stop that I was talking about. So visual interest and visual attention. Usually I'll use visual attention if it's a point of, like a negative point that I'm trying to lessen. But it has too much visual weight, so I want it to become a background statement. So that's why I take down the value contrast, the fact that that dips in between these two areas, and let it flow, and then start to connect these two. So they're disparate elements apart from one another, but I broaden the proportion, make this more linear, then it starts to feel like it's part of this family a little bit more. And maybe that's where I can get rid of something like this and bring that into a greater statement. So we get that linear flow of a speedster on that mid. It's like, it's smaller, but like a mid-level graphic design proportion. So that's what I would consider this here. And even as I add trim to something, I'm thinking about like when is it an actual like layering of trim where like this is overlapping completely, and then here you're only seeing this because you're seeing it from the side view. So if you looked at it straight down, maybe that yellow would go away completely from one view. So again, like how does it perform as it's turning in space? Because we don't want to be heavy-handed um, in any single given view. And also, and the reason why like I stumbled across that is because if I proportionally continue that same width, then it becomes too heavy-handed towards the knees. And now we're looking at the knees. But even this area is becoming, I think, a little problematic. I kind of want to just, and now that I've done this, I try to simplify. There's too much visual interest within the interior of the thigh. So like, do we want yellow? Sorry, color picker here. So like on the top of the quad, I think is going to be helpful. Just broaden it up on here and try to marry that rhythm into this. And this is where, and at this point, I'm trying to ration why, like, would there be a break between the harder armor because this is supposed to be an underlayer, so we're not necessarily putting yellow on top of a statement. So is there a segmentation there? Because I feel like the aesthetic is winning, but the function is a little difficult to rationale right now. Now that I'm seeing down here, and this V is still haunting me. So like as the character is moving and turning in space, I do want to eliminate some of these blocky statements. So in the same way we were talking about the bangles, sort of creating a flat blocky stoppage for the viewer. Um, you can have all that stuff. That's what we were talking about earlier with the boots. As we get into different functional details, that can have a level uh, of a static quality to it as a form, but we want the impression to perhaps have more motion. So the impression is going to come from the strong value contrast. So if I'm going to maybe put some yellow here to push this V statement for this sort of scenario, then maybe I'm going to follow through with that same logic and push the yellow here towards the knees. Oh my God. How many times can I complain about Windows Ink? I'm trying to get rid of this curve here and let it be more of a convex out this way. this break was obviously too much, having that segmentation. So I need a larger statement. So I don't know if I need to bring this down a bit. And now I've got these. So I'm trying, this is married into that sort of inflated triangle shape. So it's sort of creating motion this way. So this being part of this family, but now this visual statement here is sort of in conflict with this. So how do I want to find a way to try to marry those together. And to sort of cover my tracks here, this is sort of a demonstration of thinking process. I go through this all the time, and I'll try to rationalize, like, how do I create a strong graphic design with different statements being told through different uh, families of within that graphic design. And then even having done that, you look back to what you had, and you're like, well, is that any better, even if it is rationalized a little more thoughtfully? And that's why to me, it's really important to separate this process between, like, you're not illustrating, you're not drawing, you are designing. You need a painting style or a drawing style that is about sculpting and designing. It's not about painting and drawing. I need to be able to keep swift and keep reorienting to make the best statements possible. Because even after all that, man, this Windows ink is killing me. It's killing me, y'all. Oh, what was that? I want that. I'm going back. I yammered enough, and now I'm going back. So obviously these streams can and will be potentially boring if you're not the most hardcore nerd about this stuff. Jesus, can I please get my color picker working? Um, in class, I have a whole section, or not a section, a slide presentation, a loose slide presentation about how straps. This goes back to, like, is it concept art or are you designing something that feels believable? But like, straps are not design, and that was sort of becoming problematic here. So I just get rid of the strap because we don't necessarily need it. The straps is sort of hearkening to like a more utilitarian, pragmatic, like lower level sophistication of engineering that we would need for this. So I don't necessarily think we need a strap, at least in that sense. So that could be, the strap could be within the interior, or the fastening could be within the interior of the architecture of the costume. We can infer underlayers of straps, or just infer the sort of rigidity that we might need from it without actually having a physical strap. So after me doing all that paint over, just coming down to be like, oh, well, I guess we don't really need the strap, because it's only creating a problem in terms of the graphic design. So here, I want to do two things. Like my point was, I want to lessen the impact of like that extra little doodad we had here, because like this yellow is it's not doing much for us aesthetically or visually. Like it's not interesting and it's not creating flow for a dynamic character. So I want to get rid of it completely. And what I wanted to focus on was marrying these two zones where I wanted to have a little bit more yellow. I wanted to pump up the importance of the proportion of the boots. So at an angle or from the side view, you get a little bit more of a linear statement on the boot here. And then just on a little bit of a bevel on the granular level, you'll get a bit of that V I wanted. So it's sort of segmented. The V is cropped, but like you get the rhythm of the V from the top plane of that bevel. And that helps us so we don't have to have like a full V or a full strong statement from the front view. And then I can let, ideally, we can sort of find a way to marry these two zones, which is becoming problematic at the moment. Where they infer that they're marrying into a family. That kind of works. It's not great. The rhythm and the flow is as it lays on the leg is not correct. Maybe repositioning the illustration could potentially help with that. Because I want this to feel reasonable, like it's part of that. And I want the illustration to reasonably reflect that. You can see how that juxtaposition was a little odd. It was forced here, like having the very straight statement. Again, and we want to taper, we want to infer depth and motion within a static figure or a static piece of geometry, geometry being the costume itself in the illustration itself. And here, just like angling the leg is going to help with the inferred depth and motion. We're talking a lot about the costume right now, like the large graphic design as it pertains to the engineering and details as they're fused together. But then also want to get into a little bit once we do some of this into the illustration of it, how the characters pose, how the characters lit. And to me, like so much of how anyone who's making decision about this stuff is responding to it is that statement, is how it's presented. Um, that comes down to the rendering. It comes down to the pose. And in my mind, I always think of it as um, the '90s Capcom, like Street Fighter versus X-Men, Marvel versus Capcom. The impact that has, like, it goes for the jugular. Like, there's no way around it. It has this sort of visceral quality to it. Even simple drawings that Bengus did of Rogue from the X-Men or Akuma or any of the characters, you have a feeling about it because there's a inferred dynamic coming towards us and away from us that we really want to play with. Even within this photoreal subtle realm, we want to push the Z depth, meaning coming towards and away from us. Even within the subtle cock of the and tilt of the forearm or the bicep as the elbow's coming away from us or uh, towards us. So, because it could be very easy to lose sight of that stuff as we're detailing this photorealistic stuff, and like it all starts to flatten out. Then your arm feels too short because you detailed so much, but you didn't wrap the details in a way that inferred that base mannequin is turning in space appropriately. It's a lot of jibber jabber. I don't know if anybody was keeping up with the. I know not many people has been, but I've posted in the Discord that I had just got the Viz Big edition of Dragon Ball. I always loved his Dragon Ball stuff much more than the Dragon Ball Z stuff, and I just found out that this weekend that Dragon Ball there is no Dragon Ball Z in Japan. It's just Dragon Ball, but it's a nice distinction for us here because I was always like really. This is an unnecessary tangent, but here we go. I didn't really love the Dragon Ball Z stuff as much, and then I would always see the Dragon Ball artwork where he would draw tech, really fun tech and cool little. I don't know. There's something about the balance and the of detail within those that I really responded to. So I'm really excited to start. I'm like way late to the Toriyama train. I had like some figures. I have the Doctor Slump manga, but I'm definitely I just started going down the rabbit hole of his life, and I feel very late to the party, but it's pretty exciting. And I also will switch up my brushes when I need to move even faster. It could just be like a purely flat circle brush with no opacity, but I have this other old one I made, which has a little bit of texture to it. It's you can see the texture here, um, just so it's not completely graphic. But usually when I need to make very clear statements, I need to step away from painting, and I need to, if I'm not able to, if I feel like I'm being slowed down with any sort of painting, then I'll jump to something like this, which again, I'm sculpting through shape and drawing with line to create shadows and seam lines or cut lines. As I get into the blue in the angular nation, I think I want to have like another stair step up because it is so what you have flows so smoothly. It's you almost don't clock that the blue is more protective. So I want to push by a millimeter or two the level of the proportion of that as it separates. But that gives me an opportunity as well to play up the form and contrast, shape contrast a little more. Because again, right now we have the black and the yellow moving fairly swiftly and elegantly together. Maybe the internal details are something different. Like we'll keep some of the blockiness for the actual paneling between the seam lines, but the relationship of the graphic design is this very swift S curve. And then in relationship to that, the blue can have, let's say, this is sort of a segment of it, cross section. So like not 50-50 in terms of like they're not parallel. So to create more motion as it wraps from the body, let's say the body's here. This is just a flat line for the body. It'll actually taper down a bit and then go into another bevel, an angled bevel line. So there'll be different levels of thicknesses for it. And then there'll be a peak thickness that's a little bit taller within that cross section of the form as it raises from the black and the yellow. And then even within that, so like the blue is its own thing, its own compositional element, its own engineering behind how it's fused into the other two. Maybe we have a different system of rivets or clasping or woven quality to how like maybe we're hiding how it's actually attached through interior details. So we don't use these little sort of rivet details. Maybe we infer it through a sculptural statement. Because for sake of argument, if like we made those rivets a little bit bigger, they could be another statement that has a level of visual interest that may be more than we want. But we can create the same sort of like we just know that at an area in transition, we want some sort of inferred engineering that's going to be that movement between the two and show that they're somehow fused together. So this could be, again, just a bevel or like with a couple wrinkles here. So like if there's a skin on top of that material, so like there's an interior whatever metal blah 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 space age material that's protective, and then there's a skin that has a little bit of slight wrinkling to the details. So like you're not, but maybe you're not seeing any of the actual like any utilitarian functional details like a rivet or like a clasp. Like here, maybe you only see the clasps in the yellow, but on the blue you don't see any of that. Again, not that that's what that should be, but just for sake of argument, as we move through these and we detail how do we create visual interest through calling out each of these statements as something that should be thought of differently through the different zones if the design calls for that sort of level of visual interest through the subtleties. And here, I'm gonna, I don't know if this was intentional, but I'm just gonna harp on it and pretend that it is, just for sake of argument. So it looks like there's a corner here, and a corner here, and maybe a cut here, but and let's just say that's the corner. So this is sort of cut down the middle. And we, as a rule of thumb, right, it's just the base rule of thumb to get us a springboard to bounce from. We don't cut things down the middle. We don't do 50-50. My general rule of thumb is 2/3 to 1/3. Star Wars proportion is 70% simple, 30% complex. So what is your ratio and how do we use it as a springboard? For this, it's a speedster character, right? So what's the, if we're looking at a bar graph, what's the proportion? How fast? Even faster? So like we want a swift motion before we get to that corner. So we're going to take that middle corner and punch it all the way up here so that this becomes a very simple statement and the eye just flies by it. No road bumps, no extra visual weight in areas that aren't important. I'm gonna take a moment to just look at the chat. Sorry guys, this is my second stream and I see the chat moving, but I can't read it. Oh, Aiden, you just started the Dragon Ball train too? I'm pretty excited, man. I'm jealous of his career, dude. Just to get there, sit there, and you get to design all your characters and make your own. I mean, I'm sure he's sort of chained to his desk. I can't believe they're putting out like 18 pages a week. A week? Who is Lumos? How's it going? Um, Lots of yammering. So I'll do. There's no way I'm going to be able to like detail out this whole thing. So a lot of this again is just examples and ways of thinking to hopefully add visual interest as we move from one abstraction to the next, while also marrying each abstraction to one another at an appropriate level, right? Like how much versus how little do we want to have infer an elegant weaving of materials. But I want to talk about the chest a little bit here because we have a lot going on, and we always want to start with the less is more and then build from that. And the first thing you can look at is take catalog, and that's sort of another little keyword, key phrase is take catalog of what we're working with so that we can assess whether it's working or not. And right now we have the blue glow. Play the drinking game. How many times Windows Zeke is gonna goof me up? These guys here, the clasp, the blue, the yellow, and then how these things sort of interact with that all. A lot of different elements. Some are large, some are small, but we've got, let's say, medium and small elements. And I want to step it back into a very simple base statement and then build those other elements. And maybe we don't even need a couple of them. So like, what are the small elements? What are the medium elements? So right off the bat, I'm going to get rid of the glow. It's just not important at the moment. I'm going to get rid of the little neck thing, or the where the throat area is. Right now, like that's another example of visual interest and visual weight in an area that's stopping the viewer. So we want to create motion, but this is creating a stoppage. So all of this rhythm is flowing right to this, and then we're not necessarily flowing up and looking here. We're sort of stuck in this area. So you can already see that if we kill that, then we don't want to look here. There's nothing to look at. So if that's the case, then maybe I can bring this value down on the trim of the neck and have that flow and be married into this. So that, again, we want to give a sense that the black and blue are part of a greater whole and not necessarily disparate elements and disparate islands on the same field or the same layer within the costume itself. So on a macro scale, ideally, this all flows just like figure drawing class. Man, I don't feel confident jumping around to my folders right now, but in the next stream, I'll try to, I have some Capcom slides that I use for class. That would be fun to show, because like it's just about like using the rhythm lines within the Riley method to sort of create composition and fuse anatomy to composition. And that's sort of what we're doing here. So as I zoom out, I want to get a sense that all the yellow is part of a greater whole and not necessarily separate from one another. I'm not saying I'm there yet, but that's the rationale behind what I'm doing, what I'm trying to do, and ideally that we'll get there in the end. I swear to God, color pick, please. It's a professional operation, everyone. Slow down. Even that here, like hitting that thicker proportion. So let's say like we do want to keep that thin yellow. Hitting the thicker proportion here gives us a sense that this is now, we're stair stepping and able to connect the dots between a greater whole that's underneath this blue. Otherwise, it's an island here and an island here. I rambled and then I forgot what I was doing. Oh, I'm trying to add the extra wind tunnel line. So like we've got the lines between the two different materials, and I wanted to use a seam line to also be that. And every time I add a new statement, it's a new compositional element. I'm thinking about the same sort of proportional balancing. So as I lay that seam in, I'm not cutting it down the middle. That can work sometimes, but here I do want an elegant, naturalistic balance between the rhythms. So let's say that this is a third between the black undersuit and the yellow undersuit, and then 2/3 between these two, roughly. And it's all a rough guesstimation. And here, because it's this equal proportion within this thick line. I think I want to have a taper there as well, where it gets a little broader so that it starts to marry in between, so that the corner of that blue isn't so important. So, and that's going to be tricky because I do want that to seam up between these two as well. So maybe I bring this down a bit. I use, for anybody wondering, Japanese anime costumes are my litmus test for what's good and what's great. So I'll use, like, I always, I think my go-to in terms of like recommending, like, go look at the Blue Submarine 6. I'll try to post these up um, on the Discord because I have actual, like, it took me a long time, but I found some really great high-res images of the costume. But it's just a really great marrying of what we're talking about here, is like how you build the graphic design through the layering and the engineering of the costume. But that's where a lot of this is coming from as well, is my foggy memory of what I love about all of that stuff. It's like I want it to feel believable. I want it to feel real. I want to feel like somebody can zip the suit up, and I want to feel like there's some sort of technology behind it. And it's not going to feel like technology if it feels like concept art. And I think that in my mind, there could be no more greater insult to be able to, is to call something concept art. It's like, oh, it looks like concept art. Like, I want it to feel like it's a cool, fun design that somebody could build because it's so thoughtfully, like a cosplay, because it's so thoughtfully create or laid out. How do we balance aesthetic, graphic design, iconography, and realize it through inferred details, but real world layering? Hmm. Actually, now that I see this, so like again, this is her torso. If we're looking top down, because she's running towards us in her head, there's that yellow that kind of goes right into her face, and I wonder if I bring this up so it flows right with this. I use a lot of layers. Every time I'm not sure about something, and I don't know if it's just a personal insecurity, but every time I make a new statement and I'm like, oh, I got another idea, then I'll make a new layer. I'll just kablamo it full of layers. I don't like that. I like the idea, but I don't like it. New layer time. Hmm. It'd be kind of handy if they had like an audio input for the chat in case people were asking questions. Hmm. Maybe that could work. So this is me trying to highlight and accent the V that I want within the blue, while increasing the importance of the yellow as a linear statement as she moves quickly and like is sort of shooting her swiftly moving her arms through the space. Yeah, this feels aggressive and like kind of pincery, and this feels bolder and friendlier, but wrong. Just not good. Are you wrong? Maybe I can add a pattern. For anybody new to the stream or watching in the future, this is student feedback where it can get very boring at times. Watching the grass grow. Actually, this is another area where like I want more of an elegant flow, so I'm going to get rid of that trim that's next to the blue. So like maybe because I like how it's sort of like here it flows into at this angle, but maybe the linear quality is I get rid of the because to me that's like it's adding an extra fine detail that's taking away from the bold funness of the character. Funness, another key word. Is it funness? What is this concept art? You get I tend for characters that are meant to be sort of superhero-y and fun, I try not to wash out my values too much. As we get into, I don't know if we'll get there with this one today, but as we get into the illustration of it, I tend to stay closer to my local color values if it's a fun poppy character, so that I don't let the lighting wash out like the vibrancy. And also like that and that's just another proportional hierarchy thing where like you could still have some of that, but maybe it's only 10% or maybe 15% of the lighting, but the overall broader graphic. So like within this statement here, you probably have like, let's say 10% shadow, and then maybe 3 to 5% lighting. And then that even that lighting might just be like a glistening highlight that's sort of subdued and with a feathered soft edge, not an actual structural light plane. I see it's 5:15. We started about 3:19, something like that. I'm just gonna keep going. This is the first one, so until my wife yells at me, um, there's a lot to get through. So we're gonna keep going. My back hurts from holding the baby. Local colors, it's just think of it as the actual numeric color, hue, and value. So if you had a Pantone book, you could like choose what blue you want this to be and what yellow you want this to be, and then they give it to the costume fabricator, and they would actually try to match that as good as well as they can. Numeric. I'm gonna do a little bit on the back, but I'll do it quickly, and I won't yammer as much while I do it. So just know that everything I'm doing is gonna be uh, in service of a swifter statement, leading the eye, letting broader proportions. So if you have 3 planes, having a range of large, medium, and small in a way that's going to create a dynamic movement. If anybody's wondering why I'm stammering my cursor around as I'm color picking, is because window ink is preventing me from color picking. Welcome to 2026, everybody. Life is great. It seemed like a snotty thing to say. We're moving. We're moving. We're moving through space. Oh yeah, I think I want to pump up the blue. Pump up the blue. I talked earlier about how I wanted to have a more linear statement. So as like she's moving away from us, you see her calves kind of shooting through space. I don't like many. I mean, they're all competent and awesome, but to a degree, the Overwatch characters. But Tracer's got to be my favorite, and just the elegance and balance of the design. And then they got yelled at and had to change it. Um, but as I work on this, that's what I'd be thinking of is like, how can I create a swiftness like this and a beauty, but with all of the details that you want. So like you want it to have the military like um, sort of armor plating and everything, but there's still a balance between those two. Like how do you have the feminine and the masculine? What is the proportional ratio between those two things as a sort of narrative abstraction that we're orchestrating? The form of her bottom is it's I think some of the wrinkles is sort of like influencing like the shape a little too much, and the highlight is like also making it feel lopsided. Um, so I would err on the side of like I want first the graphic design to sort of make the make the most important statement. Then I'd go in there and reorient the light and shadow planes on that. Oh my god, my phone is making the noises. Hmm. It's difficult because to keep the armor plate and to have the yellow. Maybe from the back is where we can play up the yellow the most. Like um, like there's a forbidding like quality to the armored nature of the front, where like the dark is the dominant statement, but the funness of yellow comes through. But maybe as we get to the back, um, it could be like the. Hmm, now I'm thinking is like if she's faster than everybody, like is her back the most vulnerable? So like, what you want that to be less armored? I don't know. But I'm thinking that perhaps we can gain a contrast of like a soft underbelly and a more armored top portion. Oh yeah, we're gonna get rid of that pesky strap. Straps are not design. That's the quote of the day. Oh, this is something I learned. I mean, this is an animation principle in general, but I learned it from Kevin Chen. Secondary animation. So like this goes beyond like even going further beyond a costume being one note, but like having elements that sort of have secondary movements as it performs. Goku's hair, depending on the angle of the action, like is accented by the angle of the hair's movement. Um, but we could have like because I was thinking it's kind of odd to have her bottom be completely dark, but like what if I brighten it up and like is that creating the wrong statement? Like is it too soft and soft in the wrong area? Um, but then if we did add some darkness there, like could it be like sort of like plate flaps and then those things could have a little bit of movement from side to side as it's going. But then there's the very real worry of is that too much of a feminine quality for a character that's like meant to be strong in a specific way? It's like, are you putting a half skirt on her? And it's not the intention, but that will be a potential criticism. But the intention is I really want that dynamic statement, and I have to break uh, the composition to get it. You can see like sort of like whip in the air from the side as they're running. Another element comes off the character, just like the hair on the top. But I don't think that's gonna. Nobody likes us. We can't. Maybe sides so you can wrap. Dude, my phone is going nuts. Oh, one moment. Trying to take that tricep from a box to an elongated triangle. And I'm not going to resolve this because I'm going to move on to the other images, but I think there's something in that of creating a linear statement, which is lacking here, right? Because we talked about how we have like different microclimates and little islands that are not married to a greater whole, especially for a character that's meant to feel swift. And this may feel too bright and happy for what we need, but this is just the discovery process of like, how do I find the rhythms that I want and find the underlying graphic that I can then place those other details on more thoughtfully, so that it's not creating lots of stops in the design. Okie dokie. That was a lot of yammering. I'm gonna save this. Take a moment to save it, just so I can have the P. What the PSD for Shreyak. 04/12/26. I think I missed it. Did Lumos say who he is? Is that Justin? I don't know who that is. Sorry. Okay, I do want to go over some of the helmet stuff. Oh man, time does be flying. Yeah, I guess you can only get through so much, huh? Let's open the helmets. That's the fun thing about YouTube. If anybody actually does care about this yammering, it'll be there for later. And I'll try to I'll try to cut down through the pauses and everything, so it's not such a long video. It's a great thing about the YouTube studios. You can go in and actually cut up the live stream within the app. Pretty nifty. That sounds like 2026, kind of. I think I'll just bring this into Keep forgetting I don't have all my macros on my Nostromo pad. Is that the same one here? No. We're gonna need a bigger canvas. There we go. Say. Why is it showing me that? Okie dokie. Helmets. Now we can get down to like a simpler form. Now we're honed in on like a specific prop within the costume. And a lot less things to balance. I always go off of my personal knee-jerk reaction, and if you don't feel like you have a good inner litmus test, like able to look at it objectively, then just ask a lot of people, be obnoxious. Does this suck? Is this working? What does this look like? How do you feel about this? Because I'm always like I'm always asking like, how do I feel? It's like, does this feel good? Does it feel correct? How do you feel? Are we all ready to freak out? So that's my first thing is I base things off my knee-jerk reaction. Sometimes it's correct, depending on what the purposes of the design is. It may be incorrect. Plug in my mouse before it craps out on me. So, and that's what I'm looking at here is like there's two things. There's the form of the helmet, which means like if you were to just take a piece of sculpture and just sculpt the actual gray base shape of the helmet, and then the decals, the colors, the blue versus yellow versus the metal. So form versus graphic design. How does graphic design marry to form? You really like, for those of you who have not yet internalized all the vocabulary and know exactly what you're talking about when you're saying form, because sometimes someone will say form and they mean shape. It's very helpful and handy because once you really ingrain it in your mind, you're going to be able to pull these things and really articulate what you're trying to do and think through what you're doing a little better. Okie dokie. My knee-jerk reaction is that some of the noses on these is saying too much. So the good thing about it is that it creates a top plane which focuses the eyes. So the framing, the theater of it is correct. So like the theater of showing off the eyes is being what's most important on the stage. But I would say like it's almost like a duckbill quality here, which feels a little uncool for a character that's supposed to be swift and tough. And then technique is going to, I think, help in terms of execution, slowing down and really separating. Because I think you do have some nice compositing going on of like you got the shadow, then you've got the soft highlight, you've got the bounce light. But I think we want to be even slower and more thoughtful with how we describe those details. And here, you're going from, and this is why for those of you who want to get into high fidelity character design, there's no way around it. Get into ZBrush, even if you don't. I don't think there's any way of not. At the very least, we should all be somewhat familiar with ZBrush, especially the way things are going nowadays. Knowing ZBrush just means that you're still 15 years or more behind. I barely use ZBrush nowadays. I did more at my last job at Marvel TV than I did at Marvel Studios since I'm doing mostly animation stuff. But I do, where it comes in handy is that I can open a model and move things around. Like we had to reassess the Watcher's face because we wanted to have better lines for how they applied to the form. And this is sort of like what we're going on here is like So as you turn the head in space, the lines as they apply to crevices or peaks or valleys is really important. So being able to move the model around and seeing that in space and make it feel orchestrated well as it gets into a 3/4 feels appropriate in the side and front view, and reconciling as those other difficult views. Generally, you can't master all views, but you do your best. And so the reason why I brought up ZBrush is because it helps you understand edge types. So like there's edge types in terms of rendering your actual painting, like rendering the form, but then edge types in terms of how you're designing your form. So, and this is a good example where it feels like we're going into a very soft, flat edge, but then bam, we hit sharp, pinched edge. So sharp edge, very soft edge. And that juxtaposition is a little strange. And generally, and this is where we want to think too, is like, are there odd juxtapositions? And meaning by that is like, are there details or elements that are offset in a way that's taking away from leading the viewer's eye towards a focal point, a secondary focal point, or a third focal point? And here we're at the head, so we can mitigate this either by softening, so you have a gradient. Excuse me. So the edges can have a gradient. You can go from sharp to soft, and then that softness can be that transition. Remember, when you go from one zone to the next, you always want some sort of transition as a base rule of thumb. As a rule of thumb, obviously these things are broken and should be broken. But as a springboard, it's very healthy. So I think if it softens here, I feel like it doesn't soften enough. Or that sharp edge should be pushed a little bit closer towards the area of strong value contrast. And this is a good example of where you create visual interest through different means. So light value, dark light, blue through color, blue versus yellow, and then visual interest through edge types, through a sharp plane versus a flat plane for the most part, because there's a bevel here. So this is all flat plane for the most part, and then you get here and you get a sharp edge as a corner within the form. We can take that corner and push it over so it starts to become part of this statement rather than being pushed proportionally a little too far in the middle to where it starts to become a statement all on its own. And for that to work, we would need other elements that create a greater statement so that it doesn't feel like it's off on its own in a very simple ocean of simplicity. And rather than rambling, I'll just show what I'm talking about. So let's try to validate it before we try to move it. What is going on here? Just want to draw. What is happening? You can talk, but you can't draw. Something was selected. Don't know why. Okay. I promise. I use Photoshop. So here, I can create that same idea. So I'm using overlap and shadow to create a stronger form statement that's more dominant than this here. And then this being closer to this starts to bring this into the same family. And then this becomes a transition from this area of more visual weight to an area of a little bit less visual weight to an area of no visual weight for the most part. So you got a 1, 2, 3, or a dominant, subdominant, subordinate. And that's a measure of a unit of measurement that I find really handy is like, you're not just thinking in terms of large, medium, and small, but dominant, subdominant, and subordinate can be a method of impact or unit of measurement that's not relegated to the actual physical proportion of a thing. Blah, 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 blah. And all I want to do is draw my manga. I want to draw manga. But here we are talking about characters. Sorry, I'm still got a Toriyama on my brain. Oh, to be a mangaka. So that's one way. And this is what I talk about. Like we need methods and techniques that are going to allow us to uh, move our shapes around freely and never feel bogged down by the reality of it. And for me, this pen, like what I'm drawing is, it's the same idea of, I learned this from Ruben Aquino, who came to our school once to do a talk. Disney animators, like their rules of thumb is like never have any parallel lines because that's going to flatten out your drawing. So a little bit of a curve is going to infer some sort of depth and motion or movement or form. Parallel lines are going to work against that. So even if you have things that are parallel, there's still going to be a taper as it moves in space. And that's why I say, like, even if it is like you feel like you don't want it to look like a sort of isometric diagram, so caricature it a bit, like taper that slightly as we get back here, which it appears it does. But as I'm drawing, like this is one technique of me detailing and figuring out my design, is it's going back to comic book inking. So like all through middle school and high school, I did nothing but pen and ink, because that's, I graduated high school in 98. So I was just getting into digital art as I got to college. And I didn't get a computer until 2003 when I was 23. So I think it was really healthy to do nothing but pen and ink, because you have to gauge thick and thin lines, the spacing between that, and it just makes you acutely aware of appeal in design in that elusive sense. So like, in my rule of thumb is, to say it out loud, is every plane change, and this not just when it comes to like sculpting shadows with line, but in general, every plane change gets a proportion and a shape change. And that's just a base rule of thumb that allows us to create clarity and depth and sort of dimensionality, even within happy accidents. So this is the larger thickness, this is the medium thickness, this is the thinner thickness here. And all depending on where the lightnings come from, right? This might be a literal shadow plus a bit of a cast shadow. So you're not seeing, there's a lost edge here, so you're not seeing the actual cut line within that. And then here, maybe that's just a beveled shadow plane, and then maybe this is getting back into like shadow plane plus a little bit of a cast shadow. And another example of adjusting that would be through form, or rather, let's just move that bad boy. So moving over is going to do quite a bit. Now you're pointing. This is the animation principle, and Ryan at work, Ryan Meinerding, he likes to talk about this a lot, is like how you're going to design things that you're going to stage the eyes and point towards the eyes. So we're accomplishing two things here. And like you could say, yes, this is pointing towards the eye, but it's kind of pointing at the inner third, not necessarily at the pupil. So we're trying to do both of those things, point right at the middle of the eye, but also bring it proportionally over to it, so it starts to feel like the part of this family here. So we could add a corner to the silhouette here, and now this is a whole family of a side plane. So we didn't necessarily change the sculpture or the detailing, we just changed the proportion of the form. Yeah, I figured you knew ZBrush, Shreyak. I was just saying that for in general for anybody who might be listening. Yeah, I think it's pretty clear you got some chops. Chop it up. Okay. And now I'm going to work a little bit more on a macro level. Sometimes when designing, I'll just jump to a literal airbrush eraser, because if you have a Nostromo pad, which is called a Tartarus now from Razer, you can get a sharp edge by making your brush really small very quickly. and get the big, broad core shadow that you need. So sometimes I just say screw it and end up designing with the actual airbrush eraser if I feel like I need to really adjust things quickly. I think I'm getting too far. I'm gonna jump back out. I'm gonna first just talk about try to give different examples for, where's my brush? The broader statement, and then I'll go back into some of the detailings now that I've rambled in the wrong way. So we've already established that for a speedster character, generally, right? Because somebody's going to come up there with something great and wonderful that breaks our rules of thumb. But I want to take every form you have and stretch it and taper it. So I think you can improve your designs by pushing proportion and tapering quite a bit. And then I'm not sure if you looked up, like there's those goofy goofball helmets of like, I think skaters where like they have those like it almost looks like the Minish cap where like the end, maybe I'm gonna get this wrong, but like the end comes back like that. The bird from Minish Cap. Um but let's just say like we should probably be thinking about the basic shape a little bit more aerodynamically. Has anybody played Minish Cap? It's on it's on Nintendo, um what do you call it? Family service arcade. I forget what they're calling it nowadays. It's great though. Minish Cap is so dope. Who else came here to just talk about Zelda? I think like at least 2 or 3 times a year, I'll look up on YouTube and watch nothing but Zelda history videos. It's high quality health, mental health. Those are my mental health days. Pure joy in Zelda form. So I'm sort of thinking about, as I'm going, thinking about a simpler aerodynamic shape, and then just like we were talking about earlier, like within the yellow sort of S curves, having a smaller proportion of harsher statements, and that's where we get into the yellow here, like keeping what you had with the strong jaw, which is kind of cool and protective, but then bringing it in a little bit so that again we push the motion of it. I don't know what I'm not monetizing, or not, wouldn't be delusional about monetizing this YouTube channel, but I don't know what the rules are about showing stuff, because I would love to just show all the reference that we talk about on here, but I don't know what the deal is with that. It's like some people post things with all kinds of copyrighted stuff and it doesn't seem to be a problem, and then some people talk about it being a giant problem. But there's so much cool anime designs that it would be great to show and talk about. I just heard my wife and daughter yell. I think usually when they're yelling, it's the hands from Tears of the Kingdom. That or a real life spider. Oh my god. Sorry guys, next time I promise to turn off Windows ink. Jesus. So here, let's just, again, take catalog. That's the first thing we do when we assess our initial sketches. What are we working with? Medium shape, medium shape. Roughly, and I'm just gonna, they're roughly the same size. They're not exactly the same size, but close enough to be a problem. So I'm just looking at the zones. This is broken up sort of evenly. This isn't too much of a problem. I think that could work perfectly fine, depending on how it works and with everything. But that's what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to add a broader space and then letting the smaller spaces be the dynamic elements. So the yellows being the swift statement. And having more elongated statements as well. Dude, you can't even move a... Why did this... Sorry, I'm sorry for complaining. It's stuck on grabbing a layer. Holy Hannah. You're killing me. There you go. It did it. Rejoice. This glowy bit, if that's what it is or should be, I want that to be a broader proportion because it's such a strong statement. It either should be a tiny statement like you have as an accent, or something that we could punch up to be like an interesting swift statement. So like if I'm doing options, like let's say if I'm presenting something for a movie design or a video game design, I want 3 options that can go up on screen. Like I don't want, for me personally, I don't want to, you always do as many as you need to, but ideally I want 3 viable options and each one should emphasize a different quality while still staying within the bounding box of what the character is and what the purpose of the character is. You're just emphasizing different subtleties. So with this one, it's a little bit more dynamic. You could get the, again, you could utilize this light pass to have this really cool, swift, Jesus Louise, dude. Swift Akira glow as she turns her head, like in the super fast realm. And that could be really fun, but that punches up the heightened reality of it. And that's where the director would be like, that might be a little bit too much, or that's super duper cool. But you want to have a statement to grab onto from one to the next. And this is why you don't need 500. Well, these aren't 500, but like, I'd rather have 3 viable versions rather than 7 that aren't necessarily different enough in meaningful ways. So take a step back and think about it more before you actually start drawing. Say, this is what this helmet's about. This is what this helmet's about. You could, in rules of thumb, like you could use your like basic contrast to create these variations. One's a little bit more swift. One's swift, but a little bit more military, like armored. And one's even more swift in that it's such low profile and such high technology. And then whatever, some other like thing we haven't thought of yet. But it does come down to like, you can utilize rules of thumb of ways of working to create these through contrast springboards, but then also like letting yourself sit back and think a bit before you start drawing. I mean, I'm totally guilty of just drawing right away, but I tried to build that habit of thinking through that as I'm going and not just mindlessly. And not that I would accuse anybody of that. It's just if the statements aren't reading clear enough, or you haven't built that habit yet, sitting back can be helpful. Maybe here, just so tried to marry this into one statement, and this is another statement, but right now, like these are 2 in conflict. So maybe I want to bring that statement up here. So as it wraps around, and one other thing I learned from Kevin is don't be shy. And let yourself do bad sketches. Let yourself do many thumbnails, and not just thumbnails for iteration, but thumbnails for drawing your characters more than once and in different directions. So if you're not, this comes down to what we were saying earlier: is don't try to do everything in one view. Make it interesting and compelling as it turns through space. So I know right now I want this to sort of marry up and be a background statement for this. This is on top, this is below, for sake of argument. But then as it gets back, as we see it from the side view, then maybe it becomes something different. So as it shoots back here, you see that part of the top, and like, does it swoop down more? Is it more of a statement from the side? Does it end there? That could totally work as well. But we want to just play with how it flows, and as it moves from the side, the 3/4 back, and the back view in general. I would say that glowy bits are another one of those like sort of generic concept things that none of us can tend to get away from, because I'm I'm working on something as we speak. I'll be going in tomorrow and working on something with glowy bits. Um, but we just, again, we want to take it beyond concept art and make it feel like it's a meaningful thing within the engineering, and not just a design shorthand because we haven't thought about it enough. So I don't on a macro scale in her whole costume, I don't think this would work, but this is just for sake of argument, creating a broader statement with these, like, a disparate way that they're being parsed out. And almost like, again, another background statement that everything lays on. So how do you create complexity? By overlaying simplicity, rather than having a lot of simplicity that are not part of one another. Is anybody here? It's so hard to even look at the chat. If anybody's wondering why my brushes are, there's so many, it's just, I got to a point where I would use a new brush on every new thumbnail I did, just for, because a brush or a tool is going to force your hand in certain ways, but also I felt like that was the easiest way to explore brushes, is to just during the thumbnail stage pick a new brush and just play with it. So I became more familiar with what I was working with. Now it's a habit. I don't, to keep them open. I don't love how slow Photoshop moves with all of those open. And then I then I tend to like look at the sea of brushes and have no idea where my brushes are, even though I did organize them once upon a time. Maybe this will dip in. With this, I would say that in my mind right now, I'm thinking of the silhouette of the helmet as a logo, an icon. Like, that's the icon of the character. It could, if it's designed well enough, it could literally be the logo of the character. If we don't have anything else on our suit that plays that role. The same thing with the interior cut of the faceplate, like her face shape. And obviously the silhouette is going to be the most important thing, but I do want a simplicity for each of these statements. And again, as they come together, hopefully slightly compelling complexity arrives at how they interact. Check the chat. So in this one, I tried to broaden up, like make this a little bit higher, the glass portion. Jesus, Louise, help me out. So like there's, it's less brooding or less ominous the more we can open up the faceplate, even within that subtle realm. And then on this one, maybe this is the statement that I'll push here is slightly more ominous. Like not necessarily unfriendly, but within the subtleties, we want to play with these qualities, like the narrative qualities of how the shape is going to make you feel. So like there's the furrowed brow or the angry eyes. And it's not necessarily that she is angry, but you can't help but have that there. It's within the silhouette. And then how do you feel between the two? And that's the gradient you want for the person you're presenting to, is you want something for them to grab onto, some sort of narrative statement, some sort of engineering statement, some sort of graphic design statement. Here, I just want an accent of that gold color or yellow. And I want it to be swift. I want it to be slightly dangerous. In that same way we have the furrowed brow in air quotes. I want the same thing here, is I want a sharp sliver of danger from that front view. And it might broaden up again as we turn it to the side. I see no Zelda talk in the chat, and I'm very disappointed. Capicola. Alex Mandrake just showed up. Sorry, Alex, I still don't know how to pronounce your name. Mandrake? Mandragora. It's a spell. I think I'll take this and also taper it out to be a little sharper, just to go, because again, I want the aggressiveness to come through subtleties, not necessarily like the bolder shape. So like how do we balance somewhat average fun superhero with slightly sharp aggression? Um, I think I want to utilize some of what you have here, where like you're playing with some of the forms within the faceplate to carry through rhythm lines. So it would bleed away, and maybe it wouldn't get sharper until it gets back down here, but I want to have a little bit of a crease in that material to marry up with this guy here. Mandragorny. Gorus. This isn't great or cool. Just again, example for thinking your way through it. And again, I think it's funny because like any feedback I would ever give is sort of like a one-trick pony, and there's many one little tricks, but it's all very simple things. And to me, the difficulty is how are we juggling the simple things, because there's nothing like mind-blowing about any of the little rules of thumb that we're going to utilize. It's just, are we putting in the time and the mileage to have them all be second nature so we can start to orchestrate some sort of artistic statement. Never neglect liquefy. This is, I think what I did reminded me of this. It shouldn't be an old reference. It feels like it shouldn't be an old reference, but Psycho Mantis from the first Metal Gear game. He's very skeletal and has like a gas mask or something. I'm not really doing much here. And this one here, I feel like there's something interesting going on, but it does feel like this is like something different going on in the back. So I want to see if I can seam it up, make it a little bit more fun by brightening up this yellow and then use it as like a very clear framing element. Gracious. It's 6 o'clock and we haven't even talked about the boots. Man, I can't even hit the color button without it chugging. My Wacom pen just fell apart. We're being told something here. Jesus. I've never had the tip and the ring fall off together. The gods are telling me that we have to go. We are doing no good here. And in vain of this too, like we could start to. I like the idea of. I said it many times here, but the weaving of materials is a really cool evocative term. Another key word. So like let's on underneath you can have some of this sort of turquoise or teal under framework, and then we could put a little bit on the top of that, sort of snap in some of that armor. And this may not be the appropriate place or shape to do it, but just another way to create visual interest by having a different type of transitional detail that's different from what's already going on here. This is not good, but as an example. I think I did just make a snake on accident. No snakes. Excuse me. I'm gonna wrap this up and then talk about the boots, and then I will skedaddle. So just turn this on and off real quick. Just tapering shapes, adding large, medium, small, dominant, subdominant, subordinate, and then levels of transitional details. And also like proportionally can emphasize one thing over another, right? Like on this one, we proportionally gave more importance to the glowy bits. On this one, we gave more importance to the gold, as it's sort of like, it almost feels like it's part of the framework for holding the helmet together, and then the black is the sort of structural protective thing. So just being clear, like having variations that are worthwhile. Save. Okay. Now for the boots. Actually, let me flip through these real quick. The boots, the helmets, the cool variations, the bangles. These are cool too. One thing we didn't get to, and we'll just have to talk about it another time, is the illustration of the pose. We talked on it verbally, but the presentation, like the feeling you get, you have to viscerally feel like she's about to step off and just go flying, or she just maybe stop. Like depending on who the character is will sort of like dictate like which moment you're catching her in, or she could be stopped like with like you could whisper hair like like the camera just kind of stopped with her like mid motion. But that does become very important when you're trying to set yourself apart and you want your stuff to sing and you want that approval and you want to get more jobs. You have to use everything that's available to you, or you're going to be another one of the people in the weeds in ArtStation. Like how much great art is on there and you're sort of inundated by it. And what do we have available to set ourselves apart? And let's make sure we're not neglecting those things. And now we'll talk about the boots. These are cool boots. I really love these. The reason why I want to talk about this is because I feel like the blue and the black is not living up to the quality of the rest of it. And I do think some of the topology here could be plussed a bit, but it's pretty cool regardless. And here you've got a lot of texture going on. So right off the bat, it looks like there's maybe 3 or 4 here. Let's take it down to 3 at the most for the moment. At least if you're doing this high density texture stuff. Because I think this sort of like rubber matte stuff is totally fine. Like I wouldn't count that as, but this here, the form language, like this sort of feels married to this, and then this feels different. So this would almost get to the more utilitarian portion of the engineering, but it's not interesting enough to be worthwhile. So if it is a statement off on its own, let's get rid of it and let's marry it as an area of transition and integration and weaving of materials. So I'm gonna just color pick this to get rid of the value or the texture because I want to be able to redesign this a bit. So I'm gonna get rid of that edge, right? Because as concept artists, we love borders. So let's just nip that in the bud and never do that again, unless you've earned it. And straps is not designed, so we're not going to do that ever again. You're not allowed to use straps. Alex M, coming straight for him. I think we had Alex Chen and Alex M here. Alex M is Fancy Boy, so we have to listen to him. So right now, what I'm doing is I'm using the limited value palette to marry and simplify. So I'm just getting rid of all the details and making the base statement more a simplified base for everything to lay on. So I'll take this and maybe does that flow into that? Maybe. So for anybody wondering about live action design, they'll never make, for the most part, they'll never make a fully brand new boot. for a specialty costume. So like Batman from Batman the 89, it was Nike shoes with stuff stabbed onto it. If any of you have seen my Wolverine, it was a particular boot that they found, and then I just had to design stuff onto that boot. But for video games, we have unlimited budget and resources. So when it comes to specialty costumes, so it could be whatever you want. So I think for the sake of portfolio, don't even worry about that. And I want to, again, just like we were trying to do with the overall body, I want to see these things flowing in between one another, or underneath. I want to get a sense that it's a structural statement that things are laying on. Or rather, not just structural, but a unified statement and a simple statement that the more complex elements are laying on. So it's the canvas for everything. So if like, yeah. And then here, if I'm going to add detail, I'm going to add transition. So if I'm not going to change this design, let's say that's A plus and we're not going to touch it, then my details will flow from areas of function. So if you want to first start by creating visual interest through how things are attached to one another, how things are woven into one another, that's where the detail starts. That's your base structure. Then from there, in sort of in that circular way we've been designing, you have to sort of reconcile that with the graphic design. But for this case, we're just working on the undercarriage here, or the under boot. And at this point, I go back to my comic book inking days, and I'm just drawing shadows and lines to imply seams. And here these seams go right into these rivets. And that's so that we're not having extra elements. So here we have 1, 2, 3 extra things when all we need is how it looks like from here. So we could bring back, perhaps bring back this guy. So a bit of a more protective layer on the back of the leg. But even then, the transition details are still creating the same abstraction. We just shifted one of the hue and values to imply material. The reason why I didn't do that is because I think it's odd. Like I think we would have to change this to sort of flow into that a little bit more. Not that it can't have a separation like that, but it just feels a little bit like another odd juxtaposition. It's like this blocky stair step, but it's not compelling in an interesting way. And I always use Norman Rockwell as my go-to inspiration for making the mundane interesting. So when anybody says, this subject matter is boring, it's like, no, you're boring. Look at Norman Rockwell making a stupid leather shoe look amazing. So that's our job, is to make everything compelling to a degree, right? As compelling as it should be, and no more, ideally. I think this little hole is, maybe I can taper that a little more. Again, for movement's sake, to make the static object feel like it's in motion. And then functionality will dictate how tapered I can be, because the more I taper it, the more I thin it out, or could fight against the structural integrity. So those are the guidelines that we're trying to balance as we're doing all this stuff. This is another area where it just seems like a piece of detail, where like it could be like, I want to get a sense that like she could put her fingers underneath this and pull one of them off. So then like maybe this is the hinge and this is the clamp. So if there's a hinge, maybe I'm not saying this is a good idea here, but like put a little bit more wrinkling there on the other side and show more of like a little bit of a, some sort of, this is not the thought out version of it, but an element to show that it has a clamping mechanism. So you're getting meaningful visual interest in that it's telling the story of the function of the suit. And then in the subtlety here, like, do we need another transition here? Like, can the yellow be the edge of that? And to me, I'm gauging that off of, yes, it can be like you could have the extra edge, but I'm trying to gauge the funness of the character and like the narrative quality. Like any tiny little extra details, I think is like taking away from the soft, fun quality. This is something that I picked, like, at least mentally, I think of this as a Norman Rockwell thing of caricaturing realism to really emphasize the subtleties. So I always go in and I pull things out a little bit more than you think, and I push things in a little bit more than you think. So like you're not being overly subtle with the proportions of your details. So you're creating a strong, iconic statement, even within the subtleties. Since it's a special shoe, I think you should do something, and I don't know what this would be, but I think you should do something that would be more protective and also visually interesting, like an interior steel-toed shoe. But like I think the simplicity of the upturn quality is important, so she's not tripping over herself. But something here should have like a little quirkiness to it. It's like, oh, that's a cool part of that costume, even though it's just the tip of the shoe. It's the same way, like, go look at Boba Fett's feet and tell me you didn't remember Boba Fett's feet having those cool little metal hooks. Um, I guess that'll depend on the level of your nerdiness, but you get the sentiment. Yeah, even from the side view, I would want to see that. But I think we're gonna wrap it up here. I've been yammering longer than I would have thought. Um, I'm gonna blame most of that on Windows Ink. Having to color pick for like 3 seconds is not my fun. Not what I would call fun. Pulling that out a bit. Doing something special here. Um, and I didn't really get to any of this, but I would just do simpler statements, like have fun with like whether it's actual just a crease and then a bevel up, so you get some interesting sculptural qualities, and then like this could be a ribbing pattern. So like think about texture too as in levels of gradient of level of sculptural quality. So you have 2D texture and you have 3D texture. So what's your gradient and level of importance of like how you can create visual interest through that range of 1, 2, 3? Because I think what you had before was like it was just all like a lot of variety of 2D texture, but it didn't do much for us. It just added detail without adding meaning. Not this, which I know sounds harsh. It's like not that my 3D texture here has much meaning behind it, um, but we're trying to give people some visual eye candy with this kind of specialty costume design, and we don't want it to be as superficial as. Range Murata, he's another one of my um, favorite Japanese character designers. Actually, no, he did do that Blue Submarine 6 design as well. But he's got all kinds of stuff that examples of this, which is really inspiring. I kind of want to, maybe this comes down here with the cut. So here it's a double line, and maybe that double line continues under here, but then it breaks away to be a single line. And then maybe that single line, rather than having another cut line, has a beveled line. So a very subtle plane change. And if we're looking at things in terms of a cross section, like mostly want to stay away from 90-degree angles. And we want to know how light is going to play off of um, the range of these angles. And then also like being as deliberate as the angle, but then sometimes you're going to shave that corner down and you're going to sand it. It's going to be a little bit more rounded, and light is going to play at that in a different way as well. So be a 3D modeler with your paint as you get into the granular detail. Cool. All right, guys. That was too long. I am not fast. Thank you all for coming out. And for those of you that stayed as long as you did, I really appreciate it. Make them some 90s Reebok pump sneakers. Thanks, guys. Have a good night. Bye-bye. Stop streaming in progress.